Okay, so welcome to all of you, and it's a very, very interesting evening tonight. We're going to be talking about exponential technologies and how they're going to change the world. And I think it's pretty fascinating that just to start off with tonight, it's actually 1 a.m. in the morning where I am. I'm sitting here in Shanghai in a hotel room, and we've got Willem online using a technology called GoToWebinar, and I know that Jenny and the team are also online. So tonight it's I'm not sure if you'd call this an exponential technology, but it's certainly an incredible technology where we get to communicate with people all over the world and not necessarily have to fly and hire a hotel room or a seminar room and actually put on a presentation. But Willem, I just wanted to welcome you tonight. It's awesome to have you online, and if I understand it correctly, this is one of your first forays into this technology as well. So I'm glad you're getting to learn and enjoy it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks very much for having me, Scott. You're never too young or too old to learn. And certainly tonight is my first live webinar, so thanks for making this a learning opportunity for me as well.
No, fantastic. Well, you're coming through loud and clear, so that's fantastic. So I'm going to have a bit of fun this evening. As I said to you, it is 1 a.m. and I have already gone to sleep, woken up doing the webinar, and we'll go back to sleep, for tomorrow morning here in China. But I think what we're going to do just before we get started is just give a little bit of context around what is exponentials and more importantly, just who is Willem. I think I'm truly really excited to share this information. We shared it with our wealth partners back in March and had absolutely phenomenal feedback. And the one challenge that we do have is that there's just so much information to share and yet so little time, to really get it across. And I think someone like Willem's been studying this trend and what's been happening for years. And so I would ask you that tonight, if you think you're going to be able to get all the information all in one space, it's probably not going to happen. If it feels overwhelming and uncomfortable, well, that really is, unfortunately, just the world we're going into now. And our whole philosophy in terms of what we do is about empowering people and giving them access to the best information and the best partners. And we certainly believe that Willem is one of the the foremost thought leaders in the space at a global level. I do tend to start with just a quick update. What we are sharing is what our opinions are. Willem and I have spent a huge amount of time traveling the world and going and understanding it. But at the end of the day, it's still your life. You're still responsible for your life and making your own decisions. And so we're not, offering or giving you any advice. I think that's really, really important. But we are sharing from our perspective what our opinions are. And, we really have had a lot of time to travel the world and to get an understanding of what the best is happening globally. I mean, as an example, I look forward to sharing with you tonight one of the latest technologies here in China that in less than 12 months has gone from a startup that didn't exist to being worth $2 billion and earning over $1.5 million a day. So if you stay online tonight, I'm gonna share with you probably one of the simplest things I've ever seen, but how quickly the scale and innovation is. And really it's a great foray into kind of the very first question I've got for everyone. But what is a global citizen to you? What does it actually mean? And you'll see there's a little question box up in the top right corner, and if you just go and type in there, I'd like to know what do you think is a global citizen? And yes, if you thought that we were going to do all the talking, me and Willem, well, quite frankly, I want to get your brains working. So, what is a global citizen to you? And then I want to put that into the context of why this is important. So, Willem, what we need to do now is where we sit patiently and we let what most people don't know is that a webcast is where it's a one-way information transfer, whereas a webinar is an interactive session. So this is the interactive part. So I can see we've got freedom of choice to live where you want. Come on, guys, what do you think is a global citizen, particularly in the context of where technology is going and how it can allow you to live a life that you want or where you want. Someone free to travel where they wish, invest where they wish. So that's great, Scott. What do you think from a technology perspective? What is a global citizen at a technology level?
I must just say, from my side, being my first foray into this sort of tech platform, I think it's great that you can drive this sort of interaction. In fact, I'm going to tender some answers of my own here, Scott.
It'll make you think, what is a global citizen? So I think we're all global citizens. We're able to interact with people all over the world, connect wherever you like. People are free to travel the world through global investments. One who is not the disadvantage of government or capitalist goals. have information at hand instantly, aware of the wider world, and have a sense of their own role as a world citizen, be welcome in any country. So they're all correct. And, you know, for me, the word that just personally, you know, really resonates with me is really the word freedom. And why I say that is that I truly believe that if you really start to grasp what Willem's going to share with you tonight, you truly start to get the ability to have the freedom to do whatever you want in your life. You have the freedom to be able to, you know, if you're 10 years old and you're on this webinar, you'll have the freedom one day to be able to work wherever you want, for whoever you want, go to whatever university you want. You know, if you're 20 or 30 or 40 or even 60, the more you understand the technology, the more you understand the digital disruption that's taking place around the world, the more it will provide you with freedom. And really, that's the word that I believe is the ultimate word of a global citizen, the freedom of choice. Just a couple of things to set this up. You know, they reckon that in the next 10 years, it's predicted that 40% of Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist. So on the one side, you've got freedom, but on the other side, if you don't understand this, it's going to be a very disruptive period, and many people are actually going to feel a lot of pain. And you know, what we tend to say to people is that we're really trying to educate and empower people and give you access to experts like Willem, so that you can go out there and make those educated and informed decisions and make sure that you're on the other side. Another slide that I shared just today in China is that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed for failure in the 21st. So if you own your own company, or you're a major kind of decision maker in any of your companies, I know, Willem, you've worked with some of the biggest and the best around the world. If you're not thinking about how to design a business and run a business in the 21st century, like you're virtually guaranteed for failure. And you know, not only tonight are we going to start to share that process with you, but we're going to give you many different ways that you can, you know, further educate yourself and make sure that you take the responsibility to be part of the future. I mean, I think we've all seen these, you know, these different companies and the impact that these different companies have had, whether it's Amazon or Uber or Alibaba or Facebook or Airbnb or Google, all very well-known brand names. And really, in simple terms, what I always try and break down for people is that they've really just done three things that are very, very basic. And when you look at it, they've literally cut the costs, they've cut out the middlemen, and then they've increased the trust, the transparency, and the accessibility. So considering I'm in China, I'm going to talk about Alibaba. You know, before Alibaba existed, it was virtually impossible for small to medium enterprise business here in China to sell their products to global people or global companies. The only way to do it was to go to big national trade shows that cost a lot of money and were very inefficient. And equally, for global people to be able to invest and buy, you know, generators from China or pencils was very, very difficult and quite frankly very inefficient and very costly with plenty of middlemen. And then suddenly you get Alibaba sitting in the middle, and now that transparency, they've cut the costs, they've cut out the middlemen, and they've increased that trust, that transparency, and quite frankly accessibility, because every single person on this call can now go online and buy themselves whatever they want, you know, from Alibaba. You know, this is another one that I love to use, and I fly Delta a lot. And you know, most people don't realize this, but you know, Delta is actually the oldest airline in the world. And when you look at it, it was started in 1924. It literally is, it operates in 334 cities and 64 countries, employs 80,000 people, and it's valued at $37.9 billion when I last checked. You know, you compare that to Uber, which started in 2009, so not even 10 years old. And when I last checked, and I'm sure it's probably updated because that was a couple of months ago, it was 66 countries and 507 cities, and it had about 5,000 employees. And what's important is it doesn't own one taxi. When you look at Marriott, which I'm actually staying in, by the way, it's quite weird, started in 1927, it's got 200,000 employees, it's got 4,087 properties, it's in 80 countries, 697,000 rooms, it's worth about $18 billion. And what's fascinating is there was also the first company to allow online bookings, and yet you compare it to Airbnb, and it's got 100, you know, that started in 2008, so it's not even 10 years old. It's again, you know, got less than 5,000 employees. It's in 34,000 cities in 191 countries. It's got 1.5 million listings per night, and it's worth I think the latest actually was about $28 billion in terms of where it is. So this is really what leads us into your presentation here tonight, Willem, and why I think this is so important is that we really are at that inflection point. We're at that tipping point, and what a lot of people, you look down here where you've kind of got this disappointment and even deception, and over here you've got literally frustration, chaos, amazement, and really what's going to be different between chaos and amazement is what you actually do with the information that Willem's going to share with you tonight, and some of the pointers that he really does. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of introduce just a little bit around what Willem's sharing tonight. And I know that Willem, you've done a huge amount more than this, but just so that some people understand some of the foremost kind of areas that people can get more information other than what Willem's showing is that this book, Bold, is a phenomenal book. I highly recommend it. I know for Henny, it was the turning point for him because it's a big picture book where you can really understand the impact. If you really want to get into the detail of how to run an exponential organization, that book on the right there is phenomenal. And Singularity University is one of the foremost in the world where you can actually go along and learn from some of the best. But what we're really wanting to do tonight is that you don't need to travel all the way to Singularity University. The course I did alone cost me probably about 180,000 Rand just for the week, and you still got to fly all the way to America and put yourself up, etc., etc. But Willem, you've done a hell of a lot more, and it's without further ado that I really wanted to kind of welcome you. And you've literally spent the last I don't know how many years of your life, but I know when I last spoke to you, it was at least the last 3 or 4, where you've literally spent your life trying to understand these exponential technologies, working, as a one of the more senior people at Deloitte's in the consulting side, really at the center for the edge, really trying to understand this progress and where it's going. And it's without further ado that I want to hand over to you. And if you could please kind of start by giving us some sort of context of who you are, what's been your learning journey, like why has this been so interesting, and quite frankly, why is this so important for people to understand? I'm going to hand the slides over to you, so that you'll actually have them now. But yeah, I'd love to kind of just get started with some sort of understanding of just who you are and what your background is for those that are online tonight that haven't heard from you before.
Right, so thanks very much. Just the first thing, I want to make mention of those slides that you just handed over. I don't know where you got that picture from. That is very statuy work from you. I thought that wasn't published. And I'll just tell you a quick little story behind that photo. I did the graduation address, the keynote address for Wits University at some stage. And at the time I was between assistants, and as a consequence I was a little bit low on my efficacy around personal planning. So I didn't know whether this was a prize giving, that I was just going to show up and hand out some bursaries and some, a bit of cash for the best performers. And so it was a split-second decision before I actually decided to wear a suit. Failing which, I would have probably showed up in jeans and a T-shirt at a graduation ceremony to do the keynote address. So very crafty work of you to find that photo somewhere. I thought that incident had been buried.
Well, I can tell you one thing, Willem, for you and for everyone else online. Our digital reputation is now everything, and it takes one little Google search on and going to images. So yeah, it's. I always joke with my son, and people always laugh at me, but we named my son Jonty Picken, and we didn't name him Jonathan Picken because jonathanpicken.com wasn't available. And I believe your digital reputation is actually everything going into the future. So anyway, so we've got your desktop here at the moment. I can see your desktop. If you could just go, you did have your PowerPoint up.
Flip it open, and that should give you the actual presentation.
Yep, we've got your presentation up. So over to you.
All right, wonderful. Scott, you did ask me to introduce myself just briefly. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Effectively, I'm what I would like to call a reformed chartered accountant. And effectively what that means is I'm a CA by trading, but an entrepreneur at heart. So for the last number of years, I've been involved in professional services firms, did articles in entrepreneur services initially, which is a bit of a misnomer. We helped small companies that had high growth targets and ambitions to get compliant and to be able to meet regulatory compliance. Subsequent to which I moved to America, and I lived in Los Angeles for a while, or just south of Los Angeles, about 40 kilometers south. There's a town called Costa Mesa. I tried to stay fit, got involved in playing rugby, of all things, at the University of Southern California, and on a rugby tour in Las Vegas, which I can't tell you about because everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I incurred a knee injury. I will say that it was on field and was during the rugby game, in case you were wondering. At the time, I was with a medical aid in South Africa, and that forced me to return home because there was an unwillingness from the South African enterprise to pay for the reconstructive surgery in US dollars, which made sense. So I came back to South Africa only because of that. But then, of course, having tasted the scale and the size of the economy and what's happening in the technology space in the US, even though that wasn't an audit capacity, just made me yearn for a bit more. So when I could walk again, I moved to Australia, subsequent to which I lived in London for a couple of years, and then moved back to South Africa, where I built a digital sourcing business for a big firm. And when the time came, I entered the partnership. It went into financial services with a specific focus on insurance, banking, private equity, and venture capital. And you can now see a pattern start to emerge here with a bit of global exposure, an entrepreneurial foundation, and an understanding of how the big scale businesses were combined with financial services, tech, marketing. I was bound not to stay in the assurance space for long. And so I transitioned into our consulting division of the firm that I was at, where I founded a division called the Center for the Edge for Africa. And effectively, that was the sexiest job on the planet because it forced me to travel all over the planet to the different cradles of innovation, whether that was in the West Coast or the East Coast, somewhere in the middle. It included many flights on Emirates. And I saw amazing things. And the job was to move around the planet, find these cradles of innovation, understand the technology that's busy brewing there, and then ultimately synthesize it to be able to help corporates and individuals with their strategic planning, whether that's for business growth or business enterprise, business future-proofing was irrelevant. It was about being able to educate them. So I'll tell you a couple of stories as we go along, but of the interesting trips was obviously Silicon Valley, which is where the majority of the available cash flow sits, and of course everyone knows about it because it's so publicized. But one of the fewer known places that I got to frequent was Tel Aviv in Israel. Now, something that maybe is not as widely known and as popular as the sort of Silicon Valley type perspectives is that on the NASDAQ, on an annual basis, the NASDAQ being the technology stock exchange of the United States. It's huge if you can imagine where technology is going and the sort of impetus that we have in the world. The nation in the world with the third most amount of new companies listing on that stock exchange on an annual basis is in fact Israel. And that should surprise you because first is the US with nearly, what's it now, almost 400 million people living there. Second is China, where you are right now, Scott, certainly just by virtue of the volume.
Innovation, yeah, it's just normal. Like, it just blows my mind. Like, for a supposed communist country, like, the innovation here is phenomenal. Like,
yeah, well, totally. I mean, I'm quite close to the guys from Uber, and I'll tell you a story or two from the Uber perspective. And also, I can't wait to hear the story about the startup that you were talking about a little bit earlier on. But it would make sense, broadly speaking, to say that, you expect China to be in the top 3, 4, 5 listing nations in the world just by virtue of the sheer volume of the population. But then third is Israel. And Israel has a population of 8.5 million people. So how is it possible that a place with such a small population is able to produce so much innovation to the extent that they're the third highest listing nation in the world on the US tech stock exchange? That's quite something. So I spent some time in Tel Aviv, found some very interesting and amazing things there. Lots of time in Amsterdam, a little bit of time in Australia, and then of course, very proud to say, which is and in fact Joburg, underrated, but let's not forget about South Africa and Africa. We have a lot to be proud of in terms of what we achieve here. Anyway, be that as it may, so there were a lot of passports filled up on this endeavor and inside of this journey, this phase of my life. Subsequent to which I've withdrawn from our partnership, trying to go out there as an entrepreneur myself, and so two things have emerged out of that. We're busy with a financial services startup in Dallas and in San Francisco as the major sort of attraction, and the second piece that we're doing is an education technology play, which, as you see on that slide, is the Exponential Africa Institute, XAI, which, incidentally, I might just say this as an anecdote. If you say it in Khoisan, it says, you pronounce it as I, which is a deviation of the word growth, which I thought was quite nice, because part of what this institute aims to do is to drive awareness and educate people around exponential technologies, what's happening in the world at large, understand those trends, see the impact in your life or in your business, and then actually do something about it, as opposed to just hearing snippets at the water cooler or light YouTubing and be broadly acquainted. Let's get deeply acquainted and let's future-proof ourselves first and foremost, and then of course also let's see if we can capitalize on the opportunities. Scott, if you will.
From my perspective, it's a huge honor. When I first met you, it's very seldom, quite frankly, and I agree with you, there's a lot of innovation in South Africa, but it's very seldom for me that I get to meet fellow kind of global-minded people that have an understanding of where this is going and a similar passion. So it's such an honor, and I'm very grateful for you being online tonight and sharing with everyone kind of some of the key things that you've learned, through that journey.
Yeah, well, again, just thanks very much for having me. The one thing that has become abundantly clear to me is that very few people have the opportunity or the resources to do this sort of extensive traveling. It's very fortunate that I had the job that, the KPI was to find innovation and then share it. And so, I'd love for more people to become aware of this. So thanks very much for having me and providing the platform for us to share the sort of learnings that I've been fortunate enough to pick up over time, Scott.
Well,
yeah, so I beg your pardon?
I was going to say, should we deep dive? Should we jump into some of the ideas and what you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. So first of all, I will just say that I do have a Twitter feed. You'll see that I nomadically get involved in it, and I put it on the slide there. It's at @WVanderPost. And then if you do have subsequent follow-up questions that I don't manage to cover tonight, even though we do have a question forum running in the background, please use it all the time. As Scott had said, that this would be a webinar, not a webcast. We're hoping to drive as much as possible into action. But if we don't cover it, there is an email address at the bottom there that you could write down or jot down, take a quick screenshot of, and then engage with, if you like. Scott, I'm going to be using the word exponential many times today, not only because it fits into my branding, but because it underpins the philosophy of almost everything that we're going to be talking about. A quick recap just on the foundation of every argument that we're making tonight, and that's the reference to Moore's Law. Now, for those of you that don't know, Gordon Moore was the founder of the Intel Corporation, and obviously very involved in the technology advancements, given that he was one of the pioneers and the driving forces in the history of the world. This graph here depicts Moore's Law, effectively his hypothesis that on an 12 to 18-month basis, the capacity or the capability of technology would double. In other words, you would go from a 100 megahertz machine to a 200 megahertz machine in the space of 12 to 18 months. And then in the next year, 12 to 18 months, you'd go from 200 megahertz to 400 megahertz. So the increment wouldn't stay at 100, it would double. And if you plotted that advancement on a curve relative to time, what you found was that the line wasn't straight. The line curved up. It gave a logarithmic curve if you did the basic mathematics behind it. And it's colloquially referred to as an exponential curve, hence the exponential technologies and the exponential disruption that we're seeing, broadly speaking, worldwide in this time. Maybe a slide that just depicts it a little bit better is where there are actual advancements in technology as milestones that have been captured here. You can see Colossus to UNIVAC to Apple II, and so the trend continued over time. And effectively, what this says is that at some point in time, this thing is going to start running really fast. In the beginning of this curve, if we take just photography as an example, and you look at the first camera, which incidentally was created by an engineer that sat inside of Kodak that later went bust because they refused the technology, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But the first digital camera that was available for consumers, even though it wasn't at scale, was a 0.01 megapixel camera. The very next version that came out was a 0.02 megapixel camera. Now that is a major technological advance, but it's not seen as big because the absolute numbers are so small. And so in the year after that, it became a 0.04, and then a 0.08, and 0.16. These numbers being too small to take cognizance of, yet the advancement as a percentage was massive. It was new milestones. It was groundbreaking, almost revolutionary inside of the industry. And this curve depicts it. The question, of course, to ask is, if this were to carry on indefinitely, at what point in time do the advancements become so big because of this doubling power in such small frames of time? And you may have heard of this, and Scott, I know you and I have spoken about this quite often, is that there is what's colloquially referred to as the moment of singularity. That's, in layman's language, what that means is that at some point computers look at themselves and they fix their own flaws, and they improve on their own architecture and blueprints, and then implement it. And in the next fraction of time, do the same thing again, and then in the next fraction of time, do the same thing again, having these infinitely large loops and bound, quantum leaps, if you like, on every interaction. Now, of course, we are in a connected environment and in a connected world, and everyone is online, and so I have had some challenges around this. I'll show it to you here. I've had someone say to me in one of these open air CEO presentations, personally, I think they were trying to be a little bit disruptive, if you pardon the pun, but they were saying to me, Intel announced a couple months ago that they would be unable to, again, double their processor capability. And so is that infinite curve the truth, or is that just Hollywood sensationalism because it looks to this person who was an engineer or is an engineer that the curve was petering out? And so I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor here, but I'll move it along this curve. It looks like an S-curve until you find this area where it lists diminishing returns. The exciting technology in this case, my case study that I'm talking about now for Intel was silicone and transistor type technology. In other words, where we have transistors inside of a silicone wafer, and the more that you can pack in, the higher the computing power becomes, and there is just a physical limit as to when no more transistors can fit onto the same silicone wafer, and you can't make it thinner and you can't keep it cooler, and so the curve peters out. However, during the learnings that we've picked up of silicone and transistor type technology in computing, we've also learned about this new curve, and the new pioneering curve at that stage would be quantum computing, which will go through the same sort of motion, has already started on the same patterns and illustrated practically that it follows the same logarithmic suit. And at some stage, I'm sure it will also peter out, and then there will be a third S-curve that starts, which will be light computing, again, of which the first rays, pardon the pun again, of green shoots that are coming out in market research are already starting to emerge in the broader-based market. And so if you zoom out far enough, you add all these S-curves together, you again see a logarithmic curve. So Moore's law is very much alive and well. Ray Kurzweil was one of the founders of the university where Scott and I had studied, which is Singularity University in California. And this is a slide that I borrowed from him, where he depicts over time, if you look at the bottom curve sort of over here, 1900s leading up to the year 2020, that's the sort of time frames that we're talking about. And the millions instructions per second, which is abbreviated as MIPS. So the MIPS per $1,000, in other words, how much computing power can I buy for a set amount? And we're using a currency which is low on inflation and low on risk-free interest rates. So I know that the time value of money would change the $1,000, but we've picked US dollars just because it's such a nice and stable currency. So how many millions instructions per second? In other words, how much computing power can I buy for $1,000 measured in MIPS? And you can see the vertical scale illustrating those. And then there are some lacquer milestones that we've plotted out all over this curve about the specific breakthroughs and the names of the technologies that had been given at that stage. And as you can see, it started with a couple of scatter dots, and then the dot quotient, sort of the density of it, picked up quite significantly and increased over time to the point now where it's competing for space on our graph. And if you look at these different trends, the 1965, 1975, 1985, 1995 trends, and you just continue them on a linear basis, which is wrong. We should be continuing them on an exponential basis. But for the purposes of conservative illustration, if we were to complete those trends or to further extend those trends linearly, it means that by the year 2020, we're likely to look at a computing situation where the average computer available to the average consumer at about $1,000 would have the same capability as what the human brain has. And Scott, that is significant. That is very, very significant, because it means in the year thereafter we would have doubled the human brain processing capability available to consumers at a sort of $1,000 type instrument. Right now, if you look at the
I just want to put that in context. You know, people think back to 2013. You know, does that feel like a long time ago? Yes or no? And you know, because often when people even think 2020, they're like, oh, that's ages in the future. That's not going to be my problem. But when they think back to 2013, they can probably remember the Christmas holiday they had, and it doesn't feel so long ago. And my point being is that you're talking over the next 4 to 5 years, you know, a trend that is going to materially impact every single person on this webinar, and quite frankly, every single person on this planet. And it's literally a window period of 4 to 5 years. You know, it's less than most people take to get a degree.
Well, absolutely. That is such a profound statement that you've made there, Scott, because it also touches on education, the power of technology, and the impact, not only from a business perspective. I think, you know, maybe let's pause there for a second, because quite often in this sort of conversation, people relate to their jobs, specifically you know, the technology impacts that we're talking about. But I think even more importantly is the fact that you're going to find a very, very personal impact as well. You know, whether that talks to longevity, or who does your job, or how you get to your job, or what we even consider as the basis of education patterns is subject to change. I mean, just to give you an idea, the moon landing, you know, it had a certain amount of computing power. And of course, when we think about space and we think about Apollo, we think about, you know, names like Buzz Aldrin, we think about Lance Armstrong. The computing power required by NASA to do the calculations to get a man and a crew onto the moon, I mean, that was insane. In 1969, big day for the human race. Today, a Masai Mara warrior that has a feature phone, so like a Nokia 3310, has got more computing power in his hand than what NASA had available to them when they put the lives of a crew at risk and propelled the human race towards, you know, touching another celestial body for the first time, being the moon. The Clinton administration had more capability in a single cell phone than what NASA had at that time. So just profound how far these things move. And of course, the reason why I put this out there is because ultimately all these S-curves, which I've tried to draw over the logarithmic curve in the background, lead us to a point where there's an infinitely large advancement in technology in an infinitely small space of time, being the moment of singularity. And all of the technologies that we're going to be talking about tonight are finding, in one way or another, that they have gone to the point past the knee of the curve. So if you again, you know, just humor my cursor on the screen, sort of in this area where the curve clicks and, you know, faces more up than what it faces down. And the technologies that we've got on screen here are all subject to this exponential curve. All of the technologies that we'll touch on briefly tonight exhibit an exponential trend in that their capability or their capacity is doubling on an annual basis, or that the cost associated with that technology is halving on an annual basis, or even worse, both. The capacity is doubling while the cost just keeps on halving. And Scott, you and I, you know, in the live sessions are also talking about this, have talked about it, and will be talking about it when we, you know, I'm sure you'll talk about those live sessions a little bit later tonight. But one of the impacts of exponential technology is not only the disruption, you know, and all the scary stuff, or the exciting stuff as to what we'll be able to do one day. It's also about the fact that it becomes democratized. Very much also, you know, just to make mention, of course, that this is one of the foundations of Wealth Migrate, being able to democratize investment. But in the same way, most of these technologies become so cheap that they are available commercially, sustainably available
Well,
to
a
consumers.
good example, good example is the one I always enjoy. You like take a cell phone, and 20 years ago, you would have had to have all the different equipment, fax machines and scanners and GPS and one of those big block telephones. I mean, you think about how much computing power you've now got. You've already mentioned it just in your cell phone, and that's very much that democracy. I mean, you've got world maps, you've got Wikipedia, the encyclopedias for free, etc., etc. So there's another thing that two things that you said there that I think are important that I just want to make clear for everyone is that one is that we are going to be going on a journey together, and you've already very kindly started that journey with Wealth Migrate to empower and educate people. And we're looking to do stuff in May, which I'll go into in more detail a little bit later. But in May, we're going to actually take an entire workshop of time to really deep dive much more into these different technologies so that people can fully understand them. But also something that I find fascinating is that when something I only realized in the last year, which I know technically is common sense, but I think a lot of people miss it, is that what's most exciting is actually the convergence of these technologies, because it's not any one happening in isolation. It's actually where you've got all of them actually all converging towards a point, and that's the part that most people are missing, because they think, oh well, drones is going to just have a big impact, or digital biology, or 3D printing, or blockchain. But what they don't realize is where it's all starting to come together, and why it's so important for everyone on this webinar tonight, and anyone that listens to the recording, is that you've got to start perceiving in your head, like, where are these things intersecting, and how is that going to impact my life, and how can I either avoid being disrupted, or even better, plan for my future. So, without further ado, I want to hand back to you, Willem, but I think it's critically important that people don't ever take one of these in isolation, but it's actually, them blending together, where, 1 + 1 is equaling 11, not just doubling. It's not just, it's not 1 × 1 becoming 2, and 2 × 2 becoming 4, because it's actually them all happening at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Scott. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that convergence tonight as we illustrate some of these technologies. This is not a technology deep dive tonight, though. There's just way too much to cover, and I think we want to encourage people to also come to our May sessions if they're interested in some of these technologies. It's on the survey as well, where you'd like to learn a little bit more, because there's also the risk of the sci-fi half-life effect. So it's a fantastic story to listen to some of these technologies and what they're busy doing and achieving and what they're giving us as capability. And then tomorrow I've got to go back to my job and carry on with life as normal. And I missed the opportunity of engaging fully with the technology to understand the fundamental impact that it may or may not have in certain areas of my life, my job, my family, education, investment planning, retirement planning, life fulfillment, that sort of thing. So, just broadly speaking, the technologies that I'll touch on, and that's what this slide typically tries to depict. Top left is mixed reality, and we differentiate that from virtual reality or augmented reality. Below that, as you see the pair of Adidas shoes, I use that as a picture to talk about 3D printing and where we are with what's typically now known as additive manufacturing or 3D manufacturing. Below that, again here where the mouse cursor is, and Scott, just tell me, can you actually see the mouse cursor?
Yeah,
I've got a variety of
it,
screens. Okay, cool. So that's the space technology and where we're headed with that. You might see in the news now something which is actually 4 or 5 years old, where Donald Trump is starting to talk about mining the moon. In all seriousness, and I know that there are differing views about Donald Trump. That's not what I'm trying to open up here as a part of the conversation. I'm just saying that it's as official as a guy like that talking openly about mining the moon. One of the founders of one of the university where Scott and I have gone to has a company called Interplanetary Exploration that is actively scouting celestial bodies to mine them commercially. And the first ones have been scouted and valued. And we're talking about a meteor having a market value of $5 trillion. So we're talking about big, serious business here. And so there's space. We've got nanotech over here, which combines with some of the stuff that I'll be talking about in detail tonight. And then drones. A lot of people have heard of drones, and you know the fact that Amazon will deliver your socks in Manhattan using a drone. Domino's Pizza have gotten involved in that as well. Again, can I just quickly make humorously mention of the KPMG, the Klein Karoo Nasionale Kunstefees, which had beer delivered with drones, I think 6 years ago. So maybe Amazon can also learn a thing or two from South Africans in that regard.
That's classic. That's awesome, dude. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, we certainly have an entrepreneurial spirit in Africa. One of the things, Scott, maybe, you know, while the humor is out there, just to make mention of, is a lot of people look at these technologies, and I've had to comment more often than not, that suggests this is American sci-fi. You know, it will be years before it gets to Africa. Africa is the dark continent. We've heard a lot of that sort of talk. Let me pose an alternative perspective. Africa has a lot less legacy systems that still needs to be capitalized and amortized. And as a consequence, I think our canvas is a little bit more open, you know, blank in some instances. And that allows for a quantum leap in technology application and adoption. As an example, most Africans, if you think of the continent as a whole, bearing in mind that Africa is not a single country, Africa is 54 countries depending on what Sudan does on any given day. So there's complexity in the jurisdictions and the maturity and there's social constructs. But on average, Africans will skip the desktop and the laptop, and they will go from no computing device to a mobile computing device. Whereas the majority of the so-called first world is still stuck behind systems that have been integrated and rooted so deeply into society by virtue of the widespread adoption that the decoupling from those devices actually takes a little bit longer than what it does in a blank canvas type jurisdiction or area like Africa. And so don't for one second think that we won't be seeing the adoption of these technologies. In some cases, I believe we'll see the adoption in Africa at a way more rapid rate than what we'd see in the rest of the world.
Yeah, look, I mean, I feel, you know, most people have heard me talk so much about emerging economies and just the way that things happen so quickly. But also what I tend to say to people is that in the first world, often, you know, these new kind of, you know, technology solutions are nice to have. Like they could be a gimmick in many ways. Whereas in the emerging world, often it's a necessity, and you know that drives people so much more to take action so much quicker. You know, so I completely agree with you, Willem. I quite frankly think that, you know, the future is the emerging world: China, India, Africa, and you know, to take our kids and educate them in Australia is actually, you know, giving them a weakness. It's my opinion, but yeah.
Look, if you look at what the Australian rugby team is busy doing, I couldn't help but agree with you on many, many fronts. But absolutely, there is local application opportunity here. And of course, that drives the opportunities around entrepreneurship, around investment. Africa is not to be looked at as the dark continent, but perhaps as in the context of what we're talking about now as the continent of promise. Maybe just two more examples. There's a mining company that we've done some work for, a South African company that has a mining license. And one of the issues that you face if you mine in the rest of Africa potentially is jurisdiction. So in the DRC, there's some pretty aggressive regulation that dictates that any assets that you bring into the country for mining purposes are deemed property of the state. Now, in mining, things break, and so I will order a replacement part. And should that part then show up, and for the purposes of the example, just briefly, let's say that I order a 5-spoke widget, whatever that is. I place an order, and somewhere through the procurement and the supply chain services, something goes wrong, and the thing that arrives is a 4-spoke widget. Now, I've got a problem because I need a 5-spoke, and you've just sent me a 4-spoke. The bigger problem is I can't send you back the thing that you sent me because it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the state. And if I wanted to get a replacement part, effectively what that would mean is that I'd need to expropriate it. Now, the effort associated with expropriation in the DRC is not a light music kind of situation. And so what happens is a lot of the mining companies there have got piles, literally piles of parts that if they're under $1 million worth, they're chucked onto this pile and they're left there as the state property, not anything done with. And so there are massive losses. And of course, as the world becomes more competitive in the commodity space, that becomes an issue. So this company approached us, and we did a project with them where we said, well, why don't you create as opposed to import, and you 3D print the part as and when you need it. And we put that 3D printer as close as possible to where the area is that you need the part in. And the next challenge being quality of roads. Lots of the mining companies don't have big trucks that deliver parts backwards and forwards. They have motorcycles. And so imagine a swarm of tiny little 50cc scramblers that are cutting through the jungle on, contour lines that mountain goats have eked out in forest-type terrain. So what if we lifted the problem off the ground and we said, well, instead of worrying about putting a truck onto a road that doesn't yet exist, why don't we deliver those parts with drones? And so that's been happening in various mining jurisdictions across Africa on the back end of, amongst others, South African enterprises. So, yeah, there's a easy application type space with this blank canvas, and it's more opportunistic than it is, I think, threatening per se. Okay, so just back to the slide here, I'm just going to look at my other screen. So we've spoken broadly about space. We've spoken about the drones here. There's a macro and a micro application around the dronings. First, obviously, being part deliveries and retail delivery. But the other one is the one next to it right over here, where, I often get the question specifically from the insurance world as to whether or not automotive insurance is going to fall away because we'll have self-driving cars. Everyone has seen the Google cars, those little blobs that drive around Mountain View in California. Everyone hopefully has read about the fact that Uber have started, and Scott, you've talked about this, you've touched on it in the beginning of this conversation. Uber owns no taxis. There's one small correction to that. They own no human-driven taxis. In the city of Pittsburgh, within the last sort of 8 months, Uber has embarked on a journey of starting self-driving, or investing in self-driving technology. In fact, they've got a lawsuit with Google at the moment. Google owns a company called Waymo, and Waymo is the enterprise that deals with self-driving and autonomous vehicles. And so the main engineer from Waymo has now gone across to Uber, into the Uber company called Auto, as an OTTO, that does the competition for self-driving trucks specifically and taxis. And in the city of Pittsburgh, Uber had rolled out, I think it was 50 or 45 Volvos equipped with auto technology that allows for self-driving. In other words, they're switching their business model in the long run, saying at the moment, if the driver takes 20%, the owner of the car takes 60%, and Uber takes 20% of the profit. Well, imagine what we could do for pricing if we didn't have a driver and we owned the vehicles, and perhaps take our fees down to 40% of what it is currently, thereby cutting out all of the other public transport, non-autonomous type vehicles. And yes, we'd have a big maintenance bill and an insurance bill on the vehicles, but eventually all cars will be self-driving, and so it wouldn't really matter. This is such a serious trend that Elon Musk has put. If you read the terms and conditions of your Tesla that you buy now, bearing in mind that every Tesla ships with the capability of software that is enableable to effect self-driving. In fact, for the users that are online watching this webinar, if you hop onto YouTube quickly and you Google Amsterdam, Tesla avoids accident. Have a look at a self-driving Tesla doing 100 miles an hour. It's very, very fast, 160 kilometers an hour. Notices the driving patterns of a rogue driver on the road, and before the driver sitting behind the wheel is able to say what's happening, it looks like that guy is driving badly and might cause an accident. The artificial intelligence predicts an accident and brakes the car to the extent that an accident is avoided in its entirety. Now, every Uber that sells puts a limitation on the license of use on the user. In other words, if I buy a Tesla, I sign up to the terms and conditions of the agreement that suggest that I cannot start an Uber-type company by myself. I must use the Uber network for self-driving and ride-sharing. Can you believe that? So lots of people are getting involved. So you found it there. Thanks, Scott. That's exactly the one.
Just to show what you were talking about there, to start again.
If you rewind it a little bit, you'll see, and I'll talk you through this. There's a guy speeding past the camera car that we've got now. And then the AI, you can hear the beeping, immediately starts to brake the car because it noticed that this guy is likely to cause an accident. And here you have stoppage 15, 20 meters away from an actual scene of an accident because AI reacted long before the humans even foresaw that something could happen. I think the human probably was still swearing at the bad driver while the AI was already preventing an accident and loss of life. Now that changes the insurance game fundamentally. If you can think about
your screen, I'm just giving you back your screen, Willem. Sorry, I'm playing around and having a bit of fun. If you tell me you got a YouTube, then I do.
Yeah, no, okay, I'll find you some more ones, Scott. This is quite an interesting way of doing it. I quite like this duet. So, of course, that'll have a...
You just need to accept your screen again because I've given you back the presenter mode.
Okay, and I've clicked it. Are we good?
Hang on.
Let's see.
I think you're still seeing my screen.
Okay, let's say screen here.
There are two Willems, so maybe I've chosen the wrong one. Hang on. Oh, there we are. Yeah, we're back to the screen. Perfect.
Are we back? All right. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Scott, so, you know, that's quite a fundamental impact on the insurance industry, which is not billions of dollars a year, it's trillions. And so the question is, you know, how long before this stuff integrates? And you know, we as an insurance company are unable to sell our insurance products in the automotive space anymore. Now, in Africa, I think we have different challenges. I think taxi drivers are pretty hard to predict. My sense is that what we'll find is another patent by Uber in the last, I think it's 16 weeks, 18 weeks that have been filed called VTOL, as in VTOL, Victor Tango Oscar Lima. And it stands for vertical takeoff and landing. And effectively, over and above having their own self-driving cars that they're busy deploying into the market at large, they're also talking about lifting the problem 7 to 8 meters off the floor or off the road, and not contending with the integration between computerized driving and human driving, waiting for the scale to tip and for eventually everything to be autonomous driving, and saying, in the meantime, we think that we'll move people around with drones. And so on the drone technologies that I've listed over here, you know, I put the small one there for product delivery, but the big one also because I think it will be human delivery. And I don't think that you'll need a pilot's license. I think that you'll merely summon the vehicle, this autonomous airborne vehicle. You'll have it as a designated landing area. You'll hop in. You'll tell it probably with voice commands and or your smartphone where it is that you want to go. No piloting capability, skills, or licensing required, and it will simply drop you off where a ground-based Uber unit will pick you up on the drop-off area and deliver you to your destination. And that's only if real estate companies haven't already woken up and started to create bays where VTOL vehicles are able to dock to deliver you, if you think about shopping malls or schools or hotels. In fact, a very prominent and forward-thinking property developer in South Africa, the name of which I'm not at liberty to mention right now, but it's one of the prominent ones, had been engaging with us over the last number of weeks. And the shopping mall of the future, in their mind, most certainly includes VTOL type space. Again, recognizing the blank canvas power of momentum in Africa, and not long before we start seeing these units roll out. If you want, Scott, if you want some more YouTubing work,
I've actually found it. It was a great little one that I shared a while ago. I'm just going to share my screen again quickly, so we're being a bit more interactive than I normally am. But I just think it's awesome to share stuff while you're talking. So I am, so I'm on my Facebook page. This was something that I got shared by Singularity University. So you should be able to see my screen, hopefully.
Yes.
So I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but it's one of the kind of the technologies I'm talking about. I think you're talking.
Absolutely. In fact, at the Consumer Electronics Show last year, there was a Chinese unit demoed. Memory serves, it was retailing for $2,000. It could do 160 kilometers an hour. It could cover, I think it was an 80-kilometer radius. Being an exponential technology, it will do double the payload weight and double the distance at half the cost. Soon there will be solar, so there won't be an energy expenditure associated with the transport. And you're looking at a unit cost, per person shrinking, going exponentially down up until the point where we have ubiquitous access to drones that deliver us wherever we need to be delivered to. So gone are the days of traffic. Gone are the days of having to buy a $12 million penthouse in the middle of New York because you fear for traffic and getting in and out of your work situation, and as a consequence, you just get delivered. You de-urbanize, probably. You find that there's a massive repurposing of real estate. Think about all the parking lots that will be empty. Think about what we could do from a recreational perspective and turning those areas into parks or green areas from a at least a pollution perspective. And also it's something that I thought about recently is the amount of time that we spend commuting, which is dead time because we're so concentrating on not, being involved in accidents, and so ensuring the safety. There's a lot of concentration that goes involved in that, and sometimes you're on the phone, you're sure, but you're not really productive in terms of computing per se. If I'm driving or being commuted in a vehicle like mass transit in the first world without the need to actually pay attention to the driving, well, that opens up another 2.5, 3 hours per day of productivity. And so that opens up those 3 hours in other areas of my life. And so what will I do with the additional time? Are we looking at an era, that we're standing on the brink of where humans rediscover their purpose and find additional time for hobbies and exercise and health and fitness and, laugh at this if you like, but for rediscovering love and the power of relationships? When we said at the beginning of this conversation that fundamentally our lives are going to be touched, we meant it. It's not just the logistics and the sort of efficiencies of technology, it's the profound impact that it has on our lives, what we think about and what we engage our talent with, and what we spend the one thing that we can't reinvent just yet, it's time. What are we doing with that most valuable asset that we have?
Well, Willem, you need to just share your screen. I've shared your screen back with you again. But while you're doing that, I really learned this. I literally use Uber everywhere now. Even if I could hire a car, I don't, because I don't see it as just the difference between a rental car hire and the Uber cost. I see it as what's my time value of money for sitting in an hour unproductive versus being able to sit on my laptop and be fully functional and connected. It's amazing. Totally. So we got your screen back here.
Wonderful. And so Scott, to that point, the question is, is it a far leap to say that drones will make us think about love? Yeah, on the face of it, it seems that way. But if you start to fundamentally, deeply understand the principles of the technology that we're talking about, it's not a far leap. It's not a far leap at all. It's very real. Again, talks.
My uncle, I always said my uncle, has a very good understanding of where the future is. And he said to me 20 years ago, he said to me, property in any place where there's sunshine will be the future, because people don't need to live in London in the rain or New York in the snow. They can live in Brisbane or Knysna and enjoy a good quality lifestyle and still be fully interactive with the rest of the world. So I don't know. I'm kind of living that dream, as in sticking to the dream. Whether it's a reality or not, time will tell.
You're an early adopter of Knysna at the very least. So yeah, we commend you on that. Yeah, Scott, that talks to the point that we try to make at our seminars as well, and that is, don't, like the insurance industry, think self-driving car a big problem. Understand that a self-driving car is artificial intelligence, machine learning, LiDAR, radar, big data, Internet of Things, and a little bit of 3D printing. Understand what those 7 things mean and why they give us the manifestation of a self-driving car. It's like saying, you need to understand that you have a runny nose, sure, but if you understand bacteria, virus, infection type themes, then you get why you have the runny nose, and then you're not doctoring the runny nose, you're understanding the broader principle behind it. And that's what these exponential seminars are hoping to achieve, to allow people to feel understanding.
Do me a favor, Willem. When we do the event in May, we're going to go deep dive into all of them. But tonight, actually, it's really interesting. The people that think that it's going to affect them the least is digital biology. And you and I actually chose digital biology as the one we want to just kind of take a look at tonight a little bit. And the reason being is that every single human being is going to be impacted by it. And I think, quite frankly, people have actually very limited of understanding of how technology is going to change in the space. And it's just a good place to start, because every single one of us has a human body, and every single one of us, needs to understand it a little bit. So, I don't know what your thought process is, but I do find it interesting that the data says that it's going to be the one that's going to least affect people.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And the first time I had gone to a symposium, I think it was Harvard Innovation Labs back in the day. I also thought, digital biology, so what are you going to be a surgeon that's got slightly more precise, I don't know, binary type instruments in surgery? And boy, oh boy, have we got a surprise for you. And ladies and gents, for you that maybe, for those of you that haven't seen some of this content, which the 3% would suggest maybe there are many people are. I'm going to dip into that in the next 3 minutes. Scott, let me wrap up on this slide and then get to the stuff that we said that we do a bit of a dive on tonight. Just these other technologies, if you want to start reading about them in the background and then come to these sessions that we'll host where you can get deeper informed by them. There's the blockchain, which we think is going to change almost every single aspect of financial services. Blockchain in itself is a pretty big technology to talk about. It's not only in financial services. I want you to think about blockchain as something that allows for the management of ownership rights without risk of being hacked. I know how that sounds, but for the sake of this context, assume that it can't be hacked. And it allows total democratization because it's transparent and shows you every single transaction with an audit trail that's not fudgeable, which means that audit firms look to redesign their own businesses. Banks need to start rethinking their entire business models. Now, if you think banks, I mean, that's the underpinning of the wealth of the world. And that's a pretty big thing to say is going to get disrupted. Think smart contracts. Think about the IEC, so the Independent Election Commission, where we're doing a project with them now to say, can I view my voting power as an asset and perhaps have that entered into the general ledger of the blockchain that allows for election rigging free elections. In other words, truthful elections, authentically counted, not by humans, and reported on. Yes, there can be still anonymity as to who voted what, but there's zero anonymity in the disclosure of what the votes actually were. So think Zimbabwe, think Somalia, think Syria, think, for that matter, the US with George Bush Jr. So a world issue really that we're talking about. Estonia has started talking about putting all of their title deeds of every piece of real estate into the blockchain so that there's no delay in conveyancing type services when real estate is bought and sold. And if you've ever bought a house or sold a house, you'll know the headache associated with getting it through the deeds office. And not only at a far greater speed without all of the typically corrupt state-owned enterprise type systems where bribes facilitate the transaction. So that cost also falling away. Full efficiency, full transparency, and it takes 9 seconds. So in other words, if I can code a contract to say, if I have the money and I want that house, and on the other end of the contract, I have the house, but I want the money, and if we're in agreement for artificial intelligence through the blockchain to match those two wants and needs and exchange the assets, thereby giving rise to and affect the transaction that's recorded. SARS knows about it, the deeds office knows about it, the whole world knows about it. So blockchain will do a lot of things in the property space, in the financial services space, in the privacy space, and it's a technology to really watch. So some of the other ones that are on here is energy. So to give you a very interesting statistic, there are more people in the United States working in solar renewable energy today than what there are in the entire world for coal, nuclear, and other non-renewables, just in solar. Now, there's, of course, good reasons for it, and if you've ever heard my story about the solar farm outside of our atmosphere, I'll allude to that in more detail when we do the in-person sessions. But effectively, what this suggests is that the world is moving towards free energy for everyone, for anything that you want, whenever it is that you want, by virtue of harvesting the power of the sun. With many of these technologies, it's difficult to say when, but we do know that it's exponential because the track record up until now shows it. I have a very interesting slide that I show where in the 70s, the cost of a kilowatt hour in US denominated expression was $76.77, I think it was. And in 2014, it was already down to 14, where the big dark star solar farms in the Middle East can now deliver a kilowatt hour at 0.02 US cents per kilowatt hour. So we're certainly heading in that direction. Okay, there's AI, there's machine learning, there's a difference between the two. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about robots, definitely talk about the Internet of Things. But today, I'm going to maybe just go on and talk about digital biology within this frame, Scott. So I'm going to change slides just quickly. The 6Ds of innovation, or exponential framework. Incidentally, just ladies and gents, this is Scott showed the picture of the Exponential Organization's book by Salim Ismail, voted best business book by the Wall Street Journal, Amazon, and Bloomberg, I think it was, in 2014. Salim is also Singularity faculty and alumni, personal friend of mine, and we're busy co-authoring the Exponential Africa book, which we hope that we could get into publication during the course of this year still. The framework that we make reference to inside of that book is these 6Ds. So an industry is digitized, that's the first D. It goes through a very deceptive growth phase, so that's the megapixel camera example that I used, 0.01 becoming 0.02, becoming 0.04, 0.08. And then after 30 iterations is greater than a billion, something that we don't really see coming by virtue of this initial slow period, which is the deceptive period. When it gets to the sort of big numbers, that knee of the curve, nearing billions, it becomes quite disruptive. It typically dematerializes, so it loses form factor and it becomes more like a service. Think of the music industry, where we used to buy CDs with the music on them, whereas now it's a service that you get from Pandora or Spotify, so no more devices needed per se. It demonetizes, so it gets very cheap. Think of back in the day, 1997, when I bought my first CD with my own money. It was the Hackers soundtrack, ironically, and it cost me 110 Rand for an album with 11 songs on it. So I paid 10 Rand a song. And if you think of time value of money and the cost per unit, that was pretty damn expensive, because if we added inflation to that, it would have meant that I pay 100 Rand per song today, whereas I actually pay 99 US cents per song today. So it demonetizes through the use of technology. And that, of course, in itself also allows for democratization, in that everyone is able to participate because it's so cheap and accessible, and because it's typically platform-driven. So we'll talk about that framework as I just click through to the next slide here. And I've got to remember which laptop I'm on. And then we're going to dip just quickly into some digital biology. And I'm glad that most people, Scott, on that survey of yours said, think it's the least amount of impact on our lives. I'm going to talk through the slide just as an illustration of where we are in this world. So a couple of things. As IoT, so Internet of Things, is a technology. Well, let's start like this. IoT is a exponential technology in itself. IoT stands for Internet of Things, which is just tech speak, if you like, or tech talk, for referring to the fact that many devices are becoming connected. The most simple example, of course, is wearables. All right, so that's my picture over here. And we've got to go back one slide. Apologies for that. There we go. That's this part over here. The wearables. Now you can see I'm also actually wearing one right now. Yeah, this one. This is a Garmin. It measures my heart rate, my sleep patterns, how far I walk. It infers my metabolic burn rate, so I'll know if I'm getting fat or thin by virtue of how much I'm eating relative to how much I'm exercising. And all of the main companies inside of this space have got the next prototype available, which is called an insidable. So in other words, a device that I plant under the surface of my skin, that as an IoT technology has the capability not only to measure my steps and how fast I'm running or where I am, but also actual calorific burn rate, actual sugar levels in my bloodstream, actual enzyme and hormone levels in my bloodstream, actual stress. And not only in my bloodstream, perhaps in the bloodstream found in my left lung versus my right lung, or my left eye versus my right eye, the top jaw versus the bottom jaw, left ear, right ear. So we're able to start measuring individual organ health vital stats. And of course, if I have machine learning and artificial intelligence, again, two separate technologies I might just mention that we'll delve into deeply on our seminars, I have the capability of looking at the data that these sensors provide me. In other words, we're nearing the point where we're able to say, given all the data and given all the collection of this data, that a 35-year-old male working in banking from 8 to 5 that exercises like this, drinks like this, sleeps like that, has the following sexual health profile, has the following nutritional health profile, etc., etc. Well, we can look at that data and say, wow, we can infer some things onto that data because of the power of artificial and quantum computing that doesn't look for data patterns in any way like human bias does. So in other words, that 35-year-old male that I spoke about is 7 days, 8 hours, and 2 minutes away from a heart attack. And before that heart attack happens, that we're able to provide preventative medicine before that event, that life-threatening event occurs, to save that life. Now, if we think of the life expectancy curves, the mortality rates of the planet, you know, I suppose in the First World War, I think the number was, you know, we were expected to get to the age of 35. By the Second World War, it was probably 37. Right now, it's 85. If you have a tertiary education as a male, you have an 84-year expectation, and a female has an 87. The number of male to females on Earth gives us an average of 85, 85.2, I think it was. The prognosis around this is that if we're able to stop some of these events happening, we're changing that average. And so first thing that happens is just by virtue of stopping the hard inflection points, we're able to move the human life expectancy to probably 95 or 100. In fact, there's a suggestion that the first person that would live to be 150 years old is 35 years old today. That's before we get into the likes of these companies that I've listed over here. Let me just see on the right screen. The top left is a company called 23andMe, and the company below it is a sort of sister competition company that's called Ubiome. I've got the boxes here. I've done effectively what these companies allow you to do is to take a spit sample and analyze your DNA. So it's almost like a genome mapping light version, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as more and more and more people start to tender their data. So for instance, the latest report that I've received from 23andMe, having done this about 2 years ago now, is that I'm likely to sleep on my stomach and on my left side. Now that is a data inference that they're able to make by virtue of looking at my DNA, understanding what my DNA structure looks like, and then knowing that certain DNA structure components, combinations, cause certain things. As for instance, how you sleep. For instance, what color eyes you have. That's pretty obvious if we think dominant and recessive and we remember standard 8 biology, but to the extent that there are percentages associated with those probabilities now. To the extent that two parents that are having a baby could have very profound data to tell them about the health profile of their baby. In other words, are there communicable or non-communicable diseases that I am prone to, either inherently or that I have risk factors for? The 23andMe stuff has become, type stuff has become so advanced now that artificial intelligence can take a DNA swab and draw the face of the person to who that DNA belongs, having never seen the person to who that DNA belongs, with a 94% accuracy. So if you just as a simple application of that, that means that crime solving is going to get into a whole new array, a new era really, because we're not going to look for fingerprints and then hope that the fingerprints are in some database, between Interpol and the FBI. They don't share necessarily, or they're access control. We're going to take a DNA swab of the area, and we're going to draw the faces of every single person that had been there. We're going to put that into CCTV camera that is now going to span the whole world. If you think about IoT, you can't walk around in London without being spotted and featured on a camera somewhere. And effectively, we'll just come find you, come pick you up where it is that you are. We'll probably send you a drone, and you'll know that you can't run, and so you'll hop onto the drone, and if you don't, we'll just cut you off electronically from banking and buying food so that you're in a decentralized jail. Getting onto a bit of a soapbox, if you think futuristic, it almost sounds like a Minority Report, Steven Spielberg type endeavor, but that's literally where it is that we're going from a DNA perspective. Now, that's just simplified application.
Willem, just to jump in, I've just put up a poll there for people that are interested. In May, we are organizing workshops around the country. In the morning, there's going to be a really deep dive into real estate investing, both locally and globally. And whether you're a beginner or ultra sophisticated person, you'll have the ability to learn from some of the best. In the afternoon, Willem and myself are going to be, Willem's primarily, are going to be really deep diving into these technologies and the $13 trillion disruption, and really how you can take advantage of it. We are looking to put a 2-day workshop together between Willem and Dr. Dolf de Roos, which is actually going to be, really just, a real, basically the people can really learn and interact with each other. And then a lot of people have asked us about a specific course for children. So, you know, something where, I mean, it doesn't exist at the moment, but something where, you know, you take people at the age of kind of, I don't know where you would start, Willem, but 12, 13, 14, through to maybe 24, and really kind of look at their needs. And then the Wealth Weekend is what we do for our wealth partners, which is where we're going away from the 23rd to the 26th of June. I will talk about it a little bit later. I'm just conscious of the time with tomorrow's public holiday on. And so if you want to just kind of vote, I'll leave it up for another 10 seconds or so, and then go back to Willem's slides. But yeah, just let us know if you're interested. And I have also put a post in the chat box, which is events.wealthmigrate.com. And you'll see we've got things like Clem Santa coming up, Roger Hamilton, and equally these events in May with the actual dates, etc., plus the workshops and stuff of what we were talking about in June. So sorry for butting in, Willem. I just wanted to make people aware of what I had up on the screen.
Yeah, no, thanks, Scott. You actually gave me the gap just to take a bit of a breath. So thanks for that. Yeah, look, so let me wrap up in sort of 5 minutes space, Scott. What we're talking about in the capability of understanding how humans are made up through the use of nanotech, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning. When those technologies combine in the human biology space, we're entering this era where we're able to do not only the type of stuff that I've spoken about now, which sounds very sci-fi like. You know, we're also, if you look at the sort of cat pictures that I've got up there, that's two entrepreneurs that sort of outside of the regulatory space have taken to modifying DNA by virtue of a technology that's called CRISPR-Cas9. And effectively, it's a biological zipper that allows you to unpeel or zip open that double helix of DNA, and through the use of nanotech surgery, add or splice or remove certain parts of the base DNA helix, and again, through CRISPR-Cas9, zip it back up, effectively modifying life. And so here is a picture of glow-in-the-dark cats that had been created by combining the DNA from algae that glows in the dark with feline DNA to create these self-glowing cats at night. Unregulated space, so I'm not sure that we're going to be buying these cats, but or that you'd want to necessarily. Quite eerie if you think about it. But what we're talking about here is designer cats. And so by the same token, in 2015, the House of Lords in the UK passed legislation that allows for parents that have identified in their DNA makeup that there are risk profiles associated with their children that they might want to mitigate, that they're legally allowed now to harvest sections of DNA from a third-party donor and augment the DNA from their children, such as to be able to provide them with a better springboarding to healthier living or to prevent the risk factors associated with some of those diseases that have been identified. Now, great, right? So that means we're giving people quality of life and perhaps even extending life. But this is the start of it. You know, we've still got to find like the UN version of this. So nations will have to agree on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And they're not going to do that in unison and in harmony. It's going to, you know, there are a lot of things to take care of as a state. And so there will be different nations advancing at different paces inside of the space. So we have Paralympics and we've got normal Olympics, but are we now talking about the fundamentals of what might one day constitute the basis for augmented Olympics? So I want a baby that can sprint faster or jump higher or see better or have more concentration or better sense of humor, more personality. And what in the workforce does that mean for competition and fair competition between workers? At the same time, you know, we're busy in engineering weird forms of life. I read an article about 2 days ago from MIT where there are now caterpillars that have been engineered to eat plastic. So are we on the brink of being able through digital biology to solve the pollution issue that we have on the planet by virtue of creating worms that eat, you know, polymer waste? And that conversation is happening. You know, the question now is what do we do to curb the growth rates of these so that they don't inadvertently eat the plastic that we don't want them to eat? You know, by the same time, if we're looking at some of these advancements in generative design and we combine it, the digital biology space affords us the opportunity to 3D print organs. I've got a picture up there from you know, a liver that had been 3D printed, the prototype of that specifically is a synthetic version. But I've also got a piece on how the scaffolding for arteries have been 3D printed. In other words, no more bypasses by harvesting veins from your legs. We physically create, through the use of stem cells as the replacement for the ink, if you like, inside of a 3D printer, we'll 3D print biomatter. So no more lasering of your eyes. We'll print you a new eye or a new lens for your eye. We'll harvest the old one and we'll replace it with a new one that comes out of your DNA. So there's no pills or drugs to help the body accept that foreign body. It's your body that's just been augmented with 3D printing. There's a company called Modern Meadows that are doing fantastic work with harvesting of DNA and then recreating animal products, but without the animal itself. So in other words, you're talking about leather that's not synthetic. It is actual leather at an atomic level, but there's no slaughtering of a cow because it's 3D printed or cultivated, if you like. So cellular agriculture. By the same token, we're nearing, and that's why that picture is a bit of a stretch. That is a bit sci-fi, where you see the hamburger inside of the 3D printer. But we're talking about an era that is about to dawn, where we'll have our food 3D printed. And that'll give a whole new meaning to what DNA modification and GMO means. By the same token, okay, if you do hear a bit of funny noise, my 50-kilogram German Shepherd has just walked into the room. Okay, and now he's realized he's not getting food yet, so now he's leaving. By the same token, we're talking about matching medicine to the DNA of a person. In other words, Scott, you like to drink a grandpa because it works better for you. I like to drink a Disprin because it works better for me. But what if we could say that the drug with the appropriate efficacy for your type of headache, for your type of DNA, is not only a generic drug that's found on the shelf, it's a drug that is 3D printed in your home, because your Internet of Things sensors and wearables or insidables on your body have reported that a headache is coming and that you couldn't, augment your nutrition with enough water in time, and so your 3D printer starts to print a recipe which the drug company had emailed that 3D printer, or is licensing to that 3D printer for 10 pills for you to drink, and it's a Scott Picken headache pill for lack of water. So specific.
The thing that excites me about that whole thing is that, if you've got all these different medicines, and particularly for people like me that travel, like imagine just being able to 3D print like your stuff, pull them all in like one place, and like it's so much easier,
Absolutely, and that's on the luxury drugs. We call them luxury drugs when it's to augment a discomfort. But what if it were also in the space of shortening telomeres and re-lengthening them, perhaps? Telomeres being the number one biological body that causes aging. Hell, maybe we can prolong our lives to 300 or 400. Peter Diamandis has registered a company in La Jolla, California. Its name is Human Longevity Incorporated, with a stated mandate from shareholders to lengthen the lives of humans, in other words, customers, to at least 160 years of age in this iteration. So we're talking about, if you think practically what that means, maybe not one career. We're already in the space of the millennials where they say you'll have 8 careers by the age of 35, but we're no longer talking, for the frame of reference of those that sort of grew up in my era, about working 2 jobs and perhaps being at 3 different companies until the age of 65 and then retiring and then hoping that the next 40 years are funded through pension. Perhaps I'm living to 160 years old, which means I need to work for way longer, which means that my education needs to change because it needs to adapt to a change, the likes of which what we're talking about today, where the fundamentals of what we're used to starts to shift, what everything that is familiar has evaporated and we're in a new world. So how I get educated, what I get educated on, where I work, what I do at that work, how much time I'm able to take as a holiday, because if I'm going to work until 160, you can bet that I want at least 4 sabbaticals inside of that space. How am I going to fund my retirement? What do I view as risk and not as risk when I do my investment decision making, because now the time frame is fundamentally shifted. That's just on the basics of changing some of the human life expectancy stuff based on some better drugs and perhaps manipulation of 2 or 3 genes. What happens when we get into augmented intelligence? So everyone's fearful of artificial intelligence and what that will do with us. And again, come to the seminars where we'll cover this. But what happens if I'm able to put IoT and computing type power and augment my brain capability. In other words, to enhance it with technology. So now I've got not only a better brain by virtue of the genes that I've manipulated through digital biology, perhaps I'm able to add technology to my brain and then make an augmented intelligence. I mean, what's going to come out of that is almost that's infinite. Very hard to gauge, and that's why I suppose the future is sometimes so scary to all of us. And maybe I'll end with this, Scott. I think there are two ways to look at this future. There's the chaos that will ensue, and as you've seen just by the touching of one industry, there's going to be huge ramifications personally and professionally for all of us. And there's the dark and scary view of that. Robots will take our jobs. We'll have to get re-educated. We're going to live forever. What will the quality be? That's not what I profess. I think we need to look at this with the opportunities that it affords us. Imagine all the travel that we'll be able to do. Imagine the memories that we'll be able to build. Imagine the life cycles that we're able to go through. Imagine all the history that we will be a part of. This is typically the most exciting time to be alive and to be a part of the human race. And I don't think we need to fear this technology. We fear the unknown. Get it known. Lift the veil. Switch the light on in the dark room. Get an understanding and an awareness of what these technologies are, what they're currently capable of doing, where they've come from, and more importantly, where it is they're going. And that'll allow you, that'll empower you. It'll give you the tools with which to, augment your life in a way such that you're future-proofed.
Because, and I think, the other thing that I feel so strongly about for those events in May is that, bring your families. Quite frankly, for me, you've got a child that's anything older than 10 years old and is not learning about this stuff, and, it's going to be at the core of everything that they do. And, if you want to future-proof, it's one thing to future-proof yourself, but future-proof your family, which I think is critically important. I mean, I was very grateful at the event you did in March, and I got my brother to come along, who's an anaesthetist, and he keeps telling me it's never going to affect him, and I keep going, brother, there's robotics coming, there's artificial intelligence. I see a future where you might not be putting needles in people's arms. So, I think the point is we all have a responsibility actually to share this knowledge with those around us, and invite them and come and share and learn. And time is the least of the investment, because it's not really can I afford to come? It's can I afford not to come? Quite frankly.
Totally, Scott. There's so many sets of parents that came up to us at these events and said, okay, this is great for me, thank you, corporate-wise, professional-wise, thank you, we've learned some things, but I'm fearful for my children because, they might go to university and study for 4 years to solve problems that by the time that they graduate don't even exist anymore because the technology has already solved it, and new problems have emerged for which they are then unequipped. So how do we get that right as well? And there's been quite a demand for that, and so we'll create something specifically aimed at that niche of the market as well. And so yes, I agree. Even bring your family. I think that everyone stands to benefit from this type of content, and we should share it responsibly.
Cool. So, just have you got another slide there, or can I switch over quickly? I just want to share with people quickly so that they can see what the details are.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so guys, listen, I'm conscious of the time. I'm conscious of the fact that tomorrow is a public holiday. You wouldn't think that it was 2:30 in the morning and that I should actually be sleeping, but I'm actually really enjoying this. Willem, I'm sure that Denise and others are going to be quite upset with me tonight, because when you and I start talking, we get a bit excited about this stuff. We could probably talk for 3 days on it. I wanted to just share a quick picture. This was me last year in July with 2 crazy lecturers at Singularity when I was getting my certificate there. And I just really wanted to share with people, we've got some more webinars coming up with our Australian partners. Next Tuesday is actually David William Jones on 0 to 1, which is the tallest building in Cape Town and one of the most iconic buildings in Africa. I'll also share with you how you can win an apartment there. The US partners on the ground, the UK partners on the ground. One I'm really excited about, it's been about 3 years since I did a webinar with Clem Santa. I don't know if I've got a copy of my book here, I don't. But, Clem endorsed my book, and we're actually doing a webinar with him on the 9th of May, which I think is extremely exciting considering where South Africa is. And it's the scenario planning for not only South Africa, but for globally. And then on the 10th, we've got Roger Hamilton, that is also a world-respected, futurist and looking at some of the global trends and how they're impacting on real estate, and particularly he's actually got quite an exciting thing of how people can actually get involved in a big 5 game reserve. So if you're interested in any of them, just go to events.wealthmigrate.com. It would be like tonight, which is really about sharing. And then really these workshops we've been talking about, for me, there's effectively 3 parts to them. Like I said to you, in the morning, we're going to focus just on real estate. So the feedback that Willem and I had in March when we just did this for our wealth partners, which are effectively our shareholders and our very kind of exclusive, like, inner circle. But for our wealth partners, we kind of did a bit of Willem and a bit of me, and it got a little bit confusing. So what we're going to do is separate it, and in the morning, I'm going to be taking you through everything I've ever learned in terms of offshore investment, local investment, you know, how we use our models and our research, and how you can get access to the best partners, the best opportunity, how you manage risk. And, you know, quite frankly, I'd like you to bring your laptops and your iPads along, because we're actually going to help you invest. And well, you know, you don't have to, but you obviously can do it, you know, right there from as little as $100 if you want to get going. And then in the afternoon, it's really the session that Willem's talking about. And when Willem spoke last time, he only had about an hour, and as you can see, he's got a huge amount of share. And the feedback everyone gave us was it was like drinking from a fire hose. And so we've really kind of given him some decent time there to really go through that in detail, and, you know, look at some of the massive disruption opportunities, and we'll be tying that into, you know, some of the disruption opportunities within the real estate space, and how these technologies are disrupting real estate, and how we believe there's a $13 trillion, you know, opportunity there, and really around our wealth partners and what we're doing. And then something that's pretty special, Willem, which I think you will really enjoy, is our wealth partner dinners, which are exclusive dinners with our wealth partners, which will be taking place in the evening. So at the moment, the dates, I think, are the 18th of May. Well, I say I think because KZN actually needed to change. But so it's the 18th May of Cape Town, 23rd of May in KZN, and 25th of May in Midrand. And if you go to the events.wealthmigrate.com, then you can get all those details. We also got the Wealth Weekend, which is exclusive to wealth partners. We've got our partners coming out from America. 2 of our major partners are coming out from America. We're gonna hopefully have all our partners from around the world, so from China, Australia, Dubai, England, and America, all out there at the same time. So it's going to be an incredible sharing of an incredible community of like-minded people, which is effectively what our wealth partners are, and it's exclusive for the wealth partners. I'm hoping Willem will come, but I haven't asked him yet, so we'll see. And then this was an idea that Willem and I spoke about, and I've also spoken with Dr. Dolph DeRoos, and the idea was about putting together a 2-day workshop, where on the first day, you know, Willem will really deep dive and you know, take, you know, some of the best stuff that he's learned from around the world, and you literally have him exclusively, you know, for a day. And then on the second day, you'll have Dr. Dolph DeRoos, that's one of the foremost you know, thinkers in international property, and he'll be doing a deep dive in residential and commercial property. So you'll really be able to get it. So we've really kind of tried to put together something over the next 3 months. And, you know, for me today is effectively a very special day. And why I use the word today is that I'm already in the 27th of April. So, you know, Willem, I joke with people, but I'm already in the future. And today is Freedom Day. And, you know, you spoke about the 6 Ds. And really, you know, what Nelson Mandela did was so important. And you know, I'm not going to go into the 6 Ds more because you've already discussed it. But this is a rudimentary. It was a picture that I took when I was at that show. Yours looks much better than mine. But really, what digitization does and what technology does is it really is the ultimate democracy. And, you know, what I feel very, very strongly about is that when one looks at it, you know, the 27th of April is in the history of Africa probably one of the most important days in Africa, probably the world, where we went from, you know, where the very first free and fair elections, where you know, generally people didn't have political freedoms, and on the 27th of April 1994, we basically had political freedom for all. And we feel so strongly about this and about creating economic freedom for all that we actually launched our competition this week, and we're going to be, you know, a real big song and dance tomorrow. Well, tomorrow if you're in South Africa, today if you're in China, and on the 27th of April, because we truly believe that nowadays technology can provide economic freedom for all. It can empower people. It can give them access to the best technologies. And, you know, we're giving away an apartment in the tallest building in Cape Town in 0 to 1. And it's interesting because I've got some great mates from UCT that I studied with, and their response was, you know, what's the catch? And It's very typical. It was one of my great mates from that works in the existing banking environment, and he literally said to me, "What's the catch?" And I said, "Well, Quinn, I don't work for an old school bank where there's a catch. We basically want to give away an apartment so that people can experience what it's like to invest like a millionaire and to effectively do what the wealthiest of the wealthy do. But quite frankly, it's actually for everybody, and we want people to experience the technology. It's like when Uber gives away a free coupon so that you experience the technology, because we have no doubt that you will be blown away and that you'll realize that there's an entire another world out there that you can actually be able to invest, and that the old way no longer works. And I just want to make sure, can you guys actually see the screen there? It should say "Invest Like a Millionaire" on the screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So just if you are interested in entering the competition, literally go online. All you've got to do is sign up on the platform, and you're in the draw. If you're already signed up on the platform as a user, then if you go online in the next month or so, then you'll equally go in the draw. And yeah, again, what's in it for me? That's the old world, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about trust and transparency, which I think are really, really important. So this is the platform, and really what we're so excited about now. I know that Lee's online, and Derek. I was in Dubai. They're good friends of mine. I've known them for a long time, and they, Derek said to me, what used to take me months, if not years, to invest around the world, I can now do in minutes. I literally sat on my couch in Dubai. I invested in 2 properties in America and 1 in Australia. And what I love about it is you get access to the best partners, the best opportunities, and from as little as $1,000. And you don't have the traditional hassles, management issues, and complex global tax structures. You now can just focus on the best returns. And that's enough for tonight. I know everyone's getting tired, but I'll go into that in a lot more detail at the May workshops. Also what I'll be covering a lot of is, do you invest in America? Do you invest in England? Do you invest in Australia? Do you invest in South Africa? We've got models. We've got extensive models that have been built by billionaires and people that have used their experience for over 40 years, including all the models that I've got that were endorsed by Clem Sunter, and we'll be sharing with that. So that's why we get so excited, because all these technologies are happening, and yet we can also give people practical application as to how they can do it. In terms of the next steps, go online. It's literally just go to wealthmigrate.com. You register. You go in the draw. You'll get access to our 3 papers, which is the 5 laws on how to build wealth in real estate. So if you're a beginner, the 5 keys to offshore investment if you're intermediate, and then the 5 ways to expand your global real estate portfolio if you're a very sophisticated person. You'll get a copy of my ebook, which is Properly Going Global. You'll also get videos from Dolph, which are Dolph's videos that he does, teaching and learning. They're ongoing videos. They're only 2 to 3 minutes long. You'll get 20 of them. And you'll also get the opportunity to invest around the world now, USA, Australia, the UK, from as little as $1,000. And if you're looking to invest in South Africa, it's actually 1,000 Rand, which I really am quite excited. And ultimately, the best part about going online is you'll actually be able to start your investment journey. So, before I finish off and give you this, I said I promised you that I would share with you something that I found on the ground here in China, and I just wanted to share with you quickly. I was here in November last year. Now, I came about 6 times last year. My business partner, Jaco, came 9 times. We are truly passionate about what's happening in the emerging space. And really what we like to do, and what Willem's already done tonight, and what hopefully Willem and I will do a lot more in the future, is sharing with you what we're learning around the world. And this little Moby bike thing just blew me away, guys. Like literally 6 months ago, this didn't exist. Okay, I'm talking literally 6 months ago. I get there now, there are these bikes all over the place. They're either yellow, orange, or green. And if you look here in terms of the stats, they've now raised 4 rounds of funding worth $400 million US. And more importantly, just one company this month had more than 20 million users a day. Basically, you use your phone to find a bike using the GPS. You unlock using the phone, and then you ride wherever you want and leave it wherever you want. So no longer the hassle of having to pick it up in one place and drop it off. You literally just pick it up wherever you want, and you just drop it off wherever you want. They're everywhere. And they cost literally, like yesterday, me and Jaco and Ken rode across, and the whole thing for 3 bikes cost us about 10 RMB. That's about $1.50. Just to put this in perspective. Now, this company with the 20 million users, according to the stats, is already making about $1.5 million a day. Okay, I'm not sure if everyone heard me quite correctly there. It's a day, okay. And if I show you just some pictures here, you should be able to see my screen. You can see this is Ken actually unlocking the bikes. You can see him with his cell phone on the back, and they've got a little barcode. Now, what's really important is that WeChat. If you haven't seen the video, how China and the internet are going to change the world, go watch your 4-minute from the New York Times on WeChat. So this is him actually doing the scanning. This is Jakub, my business partner on the green bike. I will point out that Jakub managed to get the bike with the battery so that he didn't have to pedal. It was like an electric bike. I got the very first version of the bike, which meant it was very low and I had to pedal. So when I arrived at the meeting, I was sweating. That's me taking a selfie while driving, which I'm sure is not highly recommended in the insurance space. With Jakub behind me, I nearly caused a mass pileup because I'm not quite sure how all the road rules work. And that's Ken riding. And then this was us parking our bikes and him literally just switching them off. And we were literally outside the tube station. So it's what they call the last mile. And then the last thing I wanted to share, which just blows me away, is that they now have little booths where you can go and do karaoke. So the Chinese people absolutely love karaoke. You can go in there, you can sing a song, and you can upload it and then WeChat it to all your friends, which just blows me away, in terms of how these guys make money. And so, my question to all of you is, what business are you in today? Willem fundamentally asked you that. What business are you, today? And a lot of people think, well, I'm in the textiles business, or I'm in the banking business, or I'm in the investment business, or maybe I'm in the real estate business. But the question is, where are you going to be in 3 years? Where are you going to be in 10 years? What innovation is playing a part in what you're doing? And we asked ourselves the question at IPS, at International Property Solutions, which I started back in 1994, and I realized, and I'm sorry if there's any estate agents online, but basically technology will kill the middleman, like it's guaranteed. And like Willem said, you can either, literally, if you Kodak, a great saying I was given was rather Uber yourself than get Kodak, which I think is brilliant. And we decided to Uber ourselves at IPS and ensure that we were a technology company. And that's why, you've got Wealth Migrate, and we intend that little app to be sitting on at least a billion investors' mobile phones over the next 5 years. And really, we want to share with people how to do it. And our vision is ultimately to put, smart investing in every single person's pocket. So, come along to those May events. I really would encourage you. I think that we've got so much to share, as you can imagine. And if you're a wealth partner, Willem and myself will obviously be coming to the dinner, and we'll have time to really have an awesome chance to not only be with like-minded people, but also to do just further Q&A around a fun dinner table, and never shy of having a few beers and a bit of fun. So just to remind people, in the morning it's going to be the real estate events. In the afternoon, it's going to be the technology and the $13 trillion disruption and how you can become a wealth partner. And in the evening, it will be the wealth partner dinners. And, that's really, I understand it's getting late here, but I want to see if there's any questions quickly, Willem. There were quite a few coming through, but I just want to see if there's anything here that we need to answer today that we're not going to answer in May. And we will try and also do an online streaming. I will be honest with you, from experience, it's a very different what's the word called, result or impact it'll have on you if you live in the room, immersed, being able to ask questions. You don't have any technology issues if your streaming's not working, versus kind of streaming and kind of working at the same time. However, there's people on here from all over the world. I'm quite excited. I don't know, Willem, if I shared with you, but our user stats now, we have users from 89 countries and investors from 18 different countries. So there's people from all over the world, and so we will be streaming it as well. Yeah, if we look here, yes. How do the referrals work? My husband's registering tomorrow, so that's perfect. So Levon, if you just go to our website, you'll actually see sorry guys, there's a bit of feedback there. You'll see there that there's a section partner with us, and we've got a completely transparent program where people can share it with Okay, can you hear me clearly? Sorry, I don't know what was going on there. Willem, have you got both your... Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, Scott, the sound's gone now. You can carry on.
Okay, great. So I can see Willem's muted there, basically. So listen, there's a number of questions here, but I think what we'll do is we'll take them through to those live events. It is Freedom Day, you know, where I am already, and I suppose I need to go to sleep. I've got a massive event with the Chinese government, the institutions, our partners, and a number of venture capitalists here in Shanghai tomorrow, where we continue to share the message of how technology is changing the world and specifically changing the real estate, wealth, and investing space. But if anyone's got any questions, I'll stay online for the next minute or two. I'm not sure, Willem, I know you're there, I can see you there, but I know you're muted. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to share and finish off with tonight, and if there's anything else that you want to share before we finish up. So I don't see any other questions coming through. So I think what I'll do then is I will call it an evening. I would ask you, please, you know, our whole thing, you know, tonight is all about sharing. And my only request to you is that please go out there and share this with your friends. Let them know about it. You know, we're not trying to make money out of events. Literally, even the events in May are literally, you know, 200 Rand. And the logic behind that is just that you'll get far more value than 200 Rand. We're not trying to make money out of 200 Rand. It's literally paying for your teas and coffees. And I believe that when people pay, they pay attention. And so it just actually, you know, people commit the money, we know they're going to come versus booking and they don't turn up, which is just frustrating. But do me a favor and please go out there and let people know about it. You know, I am so passionate about this. You know, to fly all the way to Silicon Valley is going to cost you 30, 40 grand to stay in accommodation for a week is probably going to cost you another 50 grand plus your accommodation, food and drinks and everything else. And then to do the course is going to cost you probably about 180 grand. So you're all in for $250,000 Rand. And, you know, my question is, you know, why wouldn't you come and learn from someone like Willem, you know, where, you know, for virtually for free, other than your time. And so two things, you know, I really look forward to seeing you at our events, but also I really ask you to go out there and share with your friends about the events, because I think it's a travesty that so few people are getting access to this type of information and even know about it and the impact it can have on their lives in a positive way. So if anyone's got any suggestions, please also send them through to us, you know, as to how we can add more value to you, how we can add more value to your friends, what we can do to continue to build trust and educate. Because really, you know, I built my very first business and continue to build all our businesses on the same principle, which is Zig Ziglar, and it's how can we, you know, deliver more. And Zig Ziglar's principle is basically, I can have anything I want in life if I help enough other people get what they want. And, you know, we're always looking to how can we add more value? How can we help more people? And I think that's really important. Devet said, please can you do an event in Bloemfontein? And he says, as everything great starts there. So Devet, you got me to Bloemfontein twice to do events, and yeah, maybe we need to look at it. I do know it's just it's very difficult to get to and from Bloem, but we will be online. Not this time, Willem, not at Devet in May, but you know, I really want to kind of get into that space where we're doing live events, and then obviously the digital ones so that people aren't missing out. And so, guys, I'm not sure, Willem, if you're there, but if you're not, I'm going to call it tonight for everyone. I am conscious of the time and the fact that I also have to be up in 4 hours. To Jenny and the team for putting it together, I really, really appreciate it. Without you guys, you know, none of this stuff is possible. They also do a huge amount of work behind the scenes, Milani and the team that goes and takes these recordings and does quite a lot of work. I don't think anyone understands what it takes to do the renderings and then puts them up on YouTube so that the recordings are available. We did have some complications with James Painter and all the work we did last week on the Rand and the Rand predictions, and it was just around the compliance. Anyway, that got resolved today, so that recording is actually out, and I think it's fascinating that he predicted that the Rand would go below 13 Rand to the dollar, even though that we're in junk status, and it actually has done that. So once again, an expert in a different space, but these are the type of people we want to keep sharing with you so that you can learn from the best. So, Willem, it's been an honor and a privilege, as always, sharing with you. Thanks so much for sharing your insight and bring you energy. And I would like to say, if you enjoyed what you saw from Willem tonight, you should come and try and experience him in real life. He really is a bundle of energy and got a huge amount to share. So thank you very much for your time. And to all of you online tonight, I know it's the night for many of you before a public holiday, but I want to share one thing with you, and it's something I shared with the team on Tuesday. Tomorrow is Freedom Day, and basically it's all about political freedom. And on Monday, it's Workers' Day, and it's a worldwide holiday, whether you're in China, South Africa, England, America, Australia, or anywhere, quite frankly, in the world. And both of them are really kind of quite old school mindsets, which is where you're a worker and you must go to work and you must work hard and you must, work, long hours, and ultimately you'll make money and retire. And some financial institution or government's going to look after you to ultimately, give you money. Or there's political freedom, and some government's going to change its policy, and then you will get access to political freedom. Well, I truly believe that the world has changed, and I truly believe that freedom is within all of us, and that whether you want political freedom or whether you want economic freedom, we now have the answers. Technology is providing the solutions, and we all have a choice. We get to choose our framework. We can choose, whether the glass is half empty. We can choose whether the glass is half full, or we can choose what a good friend of mine, Lyndon Booth, always asks our company and our team, and that's who owns the glass. And my framework and my reference is that you own the glass. And so go out there, take control of your future, take control of your freedom, and please share with others that they too can do it. And I believe that technology is our answer. So tomorrow, while you enjoy Freedom Day in South Africa, and on Monday, while you enjoy Workers' Day, let's forget the old connotations and let's rather turn them into Freedom Day. And it's about empowering and freedom for each and every one of you individually, and quite frankly, our far greater purpose, which is freedom for everybody, and going as far as economic freedom and solving the wealth gap. And so I know that's a bit of a soapbox statement from my side, but I feel very, very strongly that this is our future, and we all have the opportunity to make it a reality. So thank you to everyone, and good night, live from Shanghai. It's been an honor and a privilege. Cheers.